Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unravel a seriously chilling supernatural case file from rural Tennessee. We're looking at a relic that doesn't just record history, but actually dictates it. So, our case study begins with a guy named Marcus. He recently moved back from Chicago to his grandfather's old house in Tennessee to take care of his sick grandmother. You know, the kind of house, thick walls, super high ceilings, and this massive ancient oak tree looming in the backyard. It really should be peaceful, but instead he experiences something highly unusual. For days, the guy just cannot sleep. And it's not from external stress or worldly worries, his eyes just snap open every few hours. He described it as this bizarre feeling, like something was waking him up from the inside, almost like a distinct, silent voice commanding him to get out of bed. And this inexplicable sleeplessness really sets the psychological stage for the anomaly he's about to uncover. Driven by this weird internal compulsion at like 2 in the morning, Marcus steps out into his empty backyard. There's no sound, no breeze moving the oak leaves, just this overwhelming sensation of being watched. And then his foot hits something in the dirt. He unearths a relic. Now, a relic, by definition, is an object surviving from an earlier time, often carrying buried history or even forgotten warnings. In this specific case, it's an old, dirt-caked book bound in leather and tied shut with a thin piece of rope. The dirt is packed on so thick, it implies this thing has been buried underground for a very, very long time. And when Marcus picks it up, a strange physical chill just runs right through him, almost as if something from inside that leather binding reached out and touched his palm. He unties the rope, opens the ledger, and what he finds inside is absolutely chilling. Written in old yet perfectly readable cursive is this entry. "Tonight, fire will break out in the eastern fields of the town. Old Raymond's son will go to put it out. He will not come back." And the date assigned to this entry? March 14th, 1987. It perfectly dictates a very real, tragic local fire from decades past. Now, Marcus tries to rationalize this, right? His heart is pounding out of his chest, but he tells himself it's just an old story, just some historical records someone decided to jot down. He's desperately trying to rely on a modern, logical perspective, categorizing this as just a creepy small-town superstition to calm his nerves. But his grandmother? She has a completely visceral, terrified reaction the next morning. When she finds out he dug it up in the backyard, all the color just drains right out of her face. She doesn't just tell him to throw it away. She issues a very strict warning. She says anything that comes up out of that ground back there, you don't touch it. Her voice has this heavy weight of recognition to it. She isn't just scared. She knows exactly what this object is. Seeking some actual answers, Marcus visits the town's oldest resident, an 80-year-old man named Harold Cooper. And Harold outlines a pretty terrifying historical timeline for him. This book, Harold explains, is essentially the town's diary. Decades ago, this mysterious stranger named Elijah Cole arrived in town, and he was constantly writing in this book, claiming he kept the town's account. But then, his account started coming true. A horse dying, that 1987 field fire. The townspeople were so terrified of his power that they actually drove Elijah out, but he left the book behind, claiming it belonged to the town. As Marcus flips through the pages later, he sees dates, 1987, 1993, 2001, each one corresponding to a verified, real event in the town's history. When Marcus asks Harold if the book predicts the future, Harold corrects him with a horrifying truth. The book does not predict the future. It writes it, completely by itself. And whatever words appear on those pages become inescapable reality. The ledger isn't just passively observing time, it's the architect of it. The ink literally dictates the fate of the town. Which brings us to the terrifying present. Marcus goes home, sits at his table, and turns to the very last page of the ledger. And he doesn't find old faded cursive this time, he finds fresh ink. It looks like it was written seconds ago, and it's dated with today's date. The prophecy reads, "Tonight a stranger will come to Marcus's backyard. He will knock on the door. Marcus should not open it, but he will." I mean, just imagine reading your own immediate fatal mistake laid out in fresh ink before you even have a chance to make it. Marcus's hands are shaking, he paces the room, once again trying to lean on logic, telling himself over and over that books simply do not write themselves. He manages to go about his evening, gives his grandmother her medication, and tries to get some sleep. But right at 11 o'clock at night, the dead silence of rural Tennessee is shattered. A single knock echoes from the back door. Marcus jolts awake, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then, a second knock. He instantly remembers that fresh ink. He should not open it. And then, a third knock. 3 deliberate sounds that basically pull Marcus out of his bed and toward the back door, walking him right into the prophecy. Now, I want you to really ask yourself what you would do in this exact moment. Marcus calls out, "Who is it?" And this low, exhausted voice answers through the wood. "Son, open the door. I'm so tired." It's the voice of an elderly man. So here is the ultimate dilemma. If an inexplicably accurate supernatural book explicitly warned you not to open your door, but you heard a tired, vulnerable old man begging for help on the other side, would you open it? Marcus rationalizes that it's just an elderly guy lost on the dark country roads. Human empathy is actively battling his supernatural dread. Well, Marcus makes his choice. He gives in to his human nature, turns the lock, and opens the heavy back door. And what does he find? Absolutely nothing. The backyard is completely empty. The road is empty. There is no tired old man. There is literally nothing but the dark, impenetrable tree line at the edge of his property and the sound of crickets cutting through the silence. Whatever entity was out there just used his own compassion against him to fulfill the ledger's unholy script. Completely confused and terrified, Marcus turns back inside the house, and he freezes. The book, which he had explicitly closed earlier, is now sitting wide open on the kitchen table. He slowly walks up to it, looks down at the last page, and right underneath the previous warning, fresh, wet ink has formed a new sentence. Marcus opened the door. It has come inside now. The ledger didn't just predict his action. It weaponized his empathy to allow whatever was outside to cross the threshold of his home. Marcus spins around. The room itself is empty, but the physical environment has definitely been breached. A long branch from that massive oak tree in the backyard has violently pushed its way right through an open window, reaching deep into the house. And wrapped tightly around that intrusive branch is a thin rope. Actually, it's the exact same thin rope that had bound the cursed book when Marcus dug it out of the dirt. And remember, there's no wind outside. There's no storm. That tree moved with a sinister, impossible intent. Panicking, barely able to catch his breath, Marcus grabs the ledger and bursts into his grandmother's room. She's already awake, sitting up perfectly straight, looking as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. When Marcus frantically tries to explain that the book is writing by itself, she drops the ultimate, horrifying rule of this relic. She tells him the book doesn't just record history, it calls. Elijah Cole locked the dark events of the town inside the ledger, and every single time someone picks it up and reads it, the book calls them in. It traps them. By reading it, Marcus hasn't just witnessed the curse, he has become an active, inescapable part of it. Looking down at the book in his trembling hands, Marcus realizes he is trapped in a real-time horror show. Right before his eyes, a new line begins to write itself, letter by letter, rising up from the page as if an invisible hand is pressing down on a pen. It dictates his final doom. The next morning, the people of the town will come to Marcus's house. They will knock on his door. No one will answer. In a final act of utter desperation, Marcus hurls the heavy book across the room. It slams against the wall and falls to the floor, landing perfectly open. But the writing on the page doesn't stop. Outside the window, the heavy branches of the oak tree begin to shift and writhe, completely on their own in the dead, still air of the night. And then the climax hits. Somewhere deep inside the dark house, a door that Marcus was absolutely certain he had locked begins to slowly creak open. The entity that the book invited in is finally making its presence known. This whole story of Marcus, Elijah Cole, and the cursed ledger brilliantly exposes the fatal flaw of human curiosity. We so often think of history as something static, right? Something we can just dig up, study, and then put away on a shelf. But what happens when the history you unearth is actively waiting for you? So let's leave off on this thought to ponder today. When buried history warns you to stay away, will you listen to the terrifying wisdom of those who came before us? Or will your own need to know end up writing your final chapter?